Hey everyone, I wanted to make a pretty special video comparing three very similar and very related watches that are all available today. These are new watches. They are reissues, kind of, sort of, depending on the watch, of the same watch or different watches. It's hard to really say. These, as you can tell, they look sort of similar. They have this bead blasted finish. They have the same case shape, clearly diver inspired, but asymmetrical. They have this bump out on the right there. Kind of forms a crown guard. This watch here is the reissued Benrus Type II. This here is the Marathon Stainless Steel Navigator without date. And this right here is the Mark II, the Paradive Gen 3. All of them awesome watches. And for some reason I have all three of them, so I thought I would give a little comparison. So a little bit of history, my knowledge of history, a little vague. In the watch and watch circles, you can find some good information on these watches, but if you really want to learn a lot, you can totally dig into the tons of military sites that have so much information on these. Starting in around 1970, the U.S. government wanted a more bulletproof specification for a military watch, and they wanted one watch for everybody: divers, aviators, soldiers, everyone to use the same combined watch, as opposed to having different watches for different kinds of members of the military. This watch was used up until then in the Korean War. Sorry, I'm saying this watch, but a watch that looked much like this without the bracelet. This standard, I think it's the GGW 113 standard. But from reading, it sounds like a lot of them were failing. This is a modern reissue of that watch. A lot of those watches failed, and in fact, a lot of people out in the field would replace their military issued watch with a Seiko, such as this. This was never an issued watch, but it's well known as being the Seiko Willard because of Apocalypse Now. It's worn in that, and it was a popular watch because of the failings of the official issued watches. So, in 1970, the government created a specification called MIL-W 50717. I believe I have that right. And it specified pretty much the watch that you see here. It was specified to be 300 meters of water resistance, or even more, I think. And it came in two different dial types. The Type II, which is what you see here, where the dial has the 12 and 24-hour markings and these little triangles everywhere. This is more familiar with, more similar to other earlier watches. But it also came in a Type I, which looked more like a traditional diver. It's the only type of dial I don't have on the table here, but a big triangle at 12 and large buttons at 3, 6, 9. I think I read that 6,000 of those Type 1s were made and about 10,000 of those Type 2s were made. And they were designed to be durable, do anything watches for the United States military. They were never sold to the public. And they were all made by this company called Benrus. Benrus has been around for a long time. I was in a pawn shop recently, and I saw an old vintage ladies' Benrus watch. They've been around for a while, making gentlemen's watches, ladies' watches. But I think by the 70s, if you can nab a government contract, why wouldn't you? Plus, the quartz was killing all these companies off. So I think that's why Benrus took these contracts, and for better or for worse, that old company Benrus became known synonymous with this one watch, even though they've had many watches over the years. They did actually make GGW 113 watches in this style, but they were the only supplier for this kind of watch. Sadly, I think they went out of business in 77, 78, and they're incredibly difficult to find. Well, I wouldn't say that, but they are old, they're beaten, they're worn, and you pay for it. So starting a couple of years ago, Benrus came back. It's one of those revival brands, zombie brands, however you want to call it. And they did an excellent job reviving that original Benrus spec. I bought the Type II because I happen to I prefer this dial, but also for some reason the Type II was on sale more so than the Type I. You see, they really did a good job at recreating that original dial. Now, the original watch, I read in some places that it was a monocoque case, as in like one piece of metal. It was actually, the back was glued in. And I think it had a two-piece crown, so you would kind of remove the crown and then you would have to like remove the dial and movement through the crystal. This reissue, I'm not exactly sure because I don't know where I would go to bite onto this, but I think this is a screwback. At least I hope it is. I don't know how I'm going to ever service this if it wasn't. But yeah, there's only 500 of them made. This is 317. Do they have that same mil spec? Yeah, there it is. Mil W 50717. Type II Class A. There was also a Class B, and that one did not have the loom because the loom was radioactive then. I think tritium loom, maybe radium loom, and that just wasn't allowed on sensitive areas. But this reissue is awesome. It's a friction bezel and it's incredibly smooth. The 12 hours here is for like aviators. You can do dead reckoning with that, but also a second time zone. This uses a SOPROD movement, and the specifications, the dimensions, as far as I know, are identical to the original. The really only the change is that's a sapphire crystal. The movement is, as I mentioned, the SOPROD. It's not an ETA movement like the original Benrus. The spring bars are spring bars. The original had fixed bars here, so you had to use a single pass. Probably the only thing I don't like about this reissue is it comes with really high quality, like seatbelt NATO or nylon quality, but a two-piece strap. I guess that keeps it thinner on your wrist, but I wanted to use it more in line with how this watch would have originally been worn. So this is a Maritac? Yeah, Maritac single pass nylon strap. And I think that just looks killer. I'm wearing a Tornec Rayville Blackjack that just came out. I should make a video on that. I will make a video on that, let's say it that way. Let me try this on, just so we can get a look at it. Because I only went through one watch and told you a bit of history, but I'll tell you the others. We'll compare them. I just think that looks really, really cool. All right, I want to move on to the next watch here. So that Benrus, that original Benrus, even though they declared bankruptcy, it seems like they still made them until 1980. You know, I guess they were still around. They were the only supplier of that watch, as far as I know. Please comment if I'm getting any of this terribly wrong. At some point, this company, Marathon, came into play. All they say on their website is that they worked with the Willis Air Force Base to make this watch, and that was in 1986. So my guess was they really liked this watch and wanted someone to keep on making it, and they worked with Marathon to make kind of an updated, modified spec version of it. The original version, for whatever reason, it didn't say Marathon on it, and it wasn't allowed to say Canada on it because Marathon is a Canadian company that works with militaries around the world. American military, British military, I know. So they sold it under a different brand called Adanac, which is the word Canada backwards. And you can find from the late 80s into the 90s these Adanac watches that look just like this. It is the exact same dimensions. I don't know if I have that here. These are 41, that's right. It says it's a 41 millimeter watch, but that's kind of because you have to include these crown guards. Normally you exclude that, but on this watch it's the case. So I think the bezel is like 38 millimeter. Let me see here. Yeah, so 39 millimeter bezel. And I'd say that's what it feels like. It feels like a 39 millimeter watch. 41 mil is with the case. And I really totally dig the size of these watches. They're clearly, even though they're reissues, they are both based on that original specification. The only difference with those Adanac watches, and later they stopped using Adanac, they started to say Marathon again. This is a quartz watch. It was in the 80s and 90s, and this reissue is also a quartz watch. This one has a little battery hatch. I think this is a press-in. Yeah, you can just barely see a little groove there if they need to service it. Really cool. Right. The original Adanac watches, plus those maybe the early marathon watches of the 90s, they didn't have these tritium tubes here. They would have much again had the little triangles around at the hour markers, just like this guy right here. At some point, all of marathon watches started to have these little tritium vials. If you look at those hour markers, they're not just a puck of lume. Those are little glass vials filled with radioactive gas. That's why it says H3 on the dial. That's the molecular formula for tritium. And you see the little radioactive symbol on there. This watch glows in the dark, faintly, but it does glow. Sadly, somewhere around the year 2000, Marathon stopped selling the stainless steel model, maybe even earlier in the mid to late 90s. The military seemed to focus on plastic watches by that time. And also the idea of standard issue watches just kind of went away. I think most people were wearing then and now, like G-Shocks and now Garmin's. So I told you the original history of that Benrus and the original history of these watches, but both of these watches came back in the past 2 or 3 years. I don't know the history of who owns the modern Benrus, but I'm pretty sure it's a different company that kind of bought the name and is focused on bringing it back. I met them at the Wind Up Watch Fair. Really nice people. Definitely dedicated to keeping the history of this watch alive. But also, there's a whole bunch of other Benrus models from their back catalog that they're bringing back. And I thought that was really exciting. Marathon, on the other hand, this is the same company. It's the same Marathon that was around, I think going into the 70s, maybe 60s. And they're primarily a military supplier. I think the original Steel Navigator in the 80s and 90s was just to the military. I don't think you could buy it to consumers. But this one you definitely can. For 20 years, you could only buy a plastic version of this. But 2022, 23 maybe, they finally brought back the Stainless Steel Navigator. There's a version with the date, and that says Marathon on the dial. The one without the date is a sterile dial, and I think it looks gorgeous. Just like the Benrus, it's a bidirectional, but this one's clicky. I think both of these inlays are aluminum, or this one might be like acrylic. You can see there's some depth. I got too many lights. You can see there's some depth to these numerals here. Oh yeah, there's also tritium lume on the hands itself. This, even though it's quartz, just like the originals in the 80s and 90s, this is a high accuracy quartz movement. It's an ETA heavy drive, pressy drive movement. So it's only going to lose a couple of seconds a year. It's a jeweled quartz movement, and I really, really dig it. It comes on their 3-piece rubber, which is really high quality. Again, the originals would have looked more like this, but I think this is great. You have this kind of Parkerized buckle as well. Let me try to get something like a wrist shot on that too. Really killer. I absolutely adore these watches. Okay, third in the list, third company. This is Mark II. I believe that's I could be way off on this. I think it's an British company. I'm not sure, but I know if it's not clear, I'm an American. We would say generation 2 or like version 2, but kind of in British English, the second version or iteration of something is Mark II, then Mark III, Mark IV. And I think that's what the name's an allusion to. He's been making watches for a very long time, and his goal is to bring back classic watches, typically military-focused watches, but with a modern spin and modern specs and quality. This one is also this Parkerized finish. This one is using a Seiko movement, this one's also an automatic Seiko. It's not the NH35. It's like a dressed up one. It's some variant of the NE. But as you see, he's played around with the dial a bit, and I totally dig it. I'm pretty sure he's borrowing these indices from the Omega Ploprof. That's another watch that I absolutely like. And this watch is unidirectional bezel. This is a proper dive bezel, not a multi-time bezel as well. And I kind of flashed the back. You can see this is definitely a screw back. Oh, water resistance. This reissue is also 300 meters, just like that original. For some reason, the Navigator is only 100 meters of water resistance. Fortunately, I've yet to dive deeper than that, but that's 100. And the Mark II is a 200-meter dive watch. I think in a vacuum, if you just showed me these watches and you wanted to know which of these has the most attractive dial, I would say this, the Mark II. I really love it. I think it looks clean, and he's done a great job. He has a history with kind of from the watch modding world into this kind of micro brand world. This is the only one with drilled lugs. I just lied. The Marathon has drilled lugs. The Benrus does not, because it would have originally been fixed lugs. It's also bigger. This one is, well, let's get an actual measurement. Instead of 38 mil bezel, it's a 41 millimeter bezel, and if we include the watch itself, 44. So yeah, this does feel larger, and that's probably my one gripe with it, and I wouldn't have had that gripe if I hadn't have felt the others. But I think this style of watch is much more appropriate for being a little smaller. 39 millimeter works really, really well. So I would have preferred if this was just a little bit smaller. But as it is, I'm having a hard time deciding which one I like the best. I think for everyday wear, the quartz movement in here and the tritium is really cool, very readable. This is the fun, fashionable version. This is also an FKM rubber strap. Probably not as interesting as the Marathon strap. We have this Parkerized buckle as well. But I think you can dress this up on leather, just do whatever weird stuff you want with it, and it would look gorgeous. And this is the authentic one. Their focus, this Benrus reissue, is on being as genuine as possible. The one other thing I wanted to point out on these, they feel and look the same thickness, but this watch is technically only 11 millimeters thick. That's tiny. And this is 15. 15 millimeter watch is a thick watch, and 11 is thin, but they're practically the same. So if there's ever a better example of how thickness can vary, I don't know it. Most of that thickness is in the curvature of this back, which you would barely ever notice. And same thing with the dome on that crystal. If you exclude that protrusion on the back and that crystal, this is also an 11 millimeter watch. To anyone out there who looks only at specs, that's a great lesson to learn in how wearability is not always obvious from just looking at the numbers. One of the reviews I read of this likens it to being a worn pebble that you might find in a riverbed, and I totally agree. I think they did a fantastic job bringing this back. This is the most expensive of the bunch. MSRP is like $1,500. I was very lucky. They had a big sale. Got it down a lot further. Both of these are around $900. That's when you can buy them. For some reason, Mark II, they're impossible. They go on sale. They sell out in minutes, maybe hours for some models, and then it'll be months before they sell more. I don't understand why. I don't know why they don't make 10 times as many watches, because they would clearly sell. Well, I'm not too sure what else is worth showing. Maybe try to line these up. I'm going to fail at that. But I'm not here to tell you which one's best, but I am here to tell you that all three of these are absolutely awesome watches. Find one that fits your needs, your budgets, and check them out. Oh, one last thing. This watch here is a Mark II. I think the guy who owns it is Bill Yao. Could be totally mistaken. There's a sister brand to this, Tornik Rayville. That sister brand seems to be more focused on bringing out more authentic versions of the original. And there's a Tornik Rayville version of this Paradive, and it does have a dial much like the original Benrus. It has the Type I dial. Part of me wishes I got that, and I'd have more authenticity here on the table, but man, that is just a really cool looking watch. Let's get some close-ups and then some lume, and let's end this because we are already pretty long. That is our, yeah. All of these have lots of AR on them, but I have lots of light on them, so, and my computer monitors. Really, really sweet. All right, let's turn off the lights and get these glowing a bit. Well, I know this is green superluminova. You know, the reflections in the room make this really bad, but I apologize. Really cool. I wanted to end with you seeing the glow of the Marathon, but, well, that is not good. And let's see if this can, let's see, can we do it? You can kind of tell that those are just glowing all the time. They don't glow as bright as, wow, this is great cinematography here, isn't it? They don't glow as bright as loom would. I think that's the best we're gonna get. Oh, that's terrible. It doesn't get as bright as loom, as the other two, but it's always there. It doesn't need to be charged up. It just glows continuously. You know, after 10, 20 years, it starts to fade. Anyways, hopefully this was helpful in some ways. Hopefully the cinematography, you know, if you didn't like it, your refund's in the mail, right? All right. Thank you very much. Take care.